Hey guys, welcome to week 22. We are studying Freud this week, and our Neo-Freudians, we have a lot of content to get to, so let's get started. So we're studying personality this week, and all of you have plenty of them, so let's talk about what is personality. Personality is unique and relatively stable ways in which people think, feel, and behave. So when we think about personality, it's about consistency. It's about people who are genuinely happy-go-lucky people. That's their personality. Not sometimes people rage. It's about consistency. Now, inside, under the umbrella of personality, you have character. And character is a value judgment of a person's moral and ethical behavior. So that's what they think is right or wrong. And what you think is right or wrong is based on your religion, based on your experiences, based on the way you were raised. All those different aspects come into shaping your character. And finally, your temperament. Now, your temperament has been formed by your birth. Remember, you come out of the womb with a temperament, whether you're a happy-go-lucky baby, whether you're fussy, all those different types of things we've continued talked about. So your personality is shaped by both your character and your temperament. Now, when we talk about personality, we're really talking about four different aspects. Now, psychoanalytic is based entirely, wholly, embodies everything that Freud accomplished, from his id, ego, superego, which we'll find out about in a second, your conscious, unconscious, preconscious, and of course, your psychosexual stages. All of those are coming up, and those are all 100% based on Freud. Then you have the behavioristic, which includes your social cognitive theory that takes into certain behaviors dictate, and the way how society tells you to behave comes into of being. Humanistic, the fact that we've evolved and we are so much further beyond, and our personality is shaped to reflect our evolution. And then finally, your trait perspectives, which is telling us the foundations of each of our society and how they build into a personality instead of a personality dictates your traits. So a lot of interesting perspectives we're going to be covering this week. So, Sigmund Freud. Now, we've been talking about Freud. You've heard me mention Freud. You've written psychoanalytic. We've talked about Freud. I kept warning you, he's kind of a creep. Well, Sigmund Freud is the foundation of personality because he's the first one to study personality. Now, Sigmund Freud is the founder of psychoanalytic movement in psychology. He is the foundation of personality, and he's the first one to really sit down and study it and come up with what will eventually be the foundation of everything else. Now, it is important to note that Freud was doing this research in the Victorian age. Now, the Victorian age is known for its suppression of immoral behavior, or suppression of animalistic behaviors. It was very ruled structures. It was very sexually repressed. The reason why this is a big deal is because when Freud comes out with all these ideas, these sexually charged theories, it's very scandalous and quite controversial. Now, Sigmund Freud is going to rise in popularity when the id, the ego, superego, the conscious, preconscious, and subconscious, and eventually with the psychosexual stages. However, he will eventually fall out of favor because he gets too far into the freaky, weird sex stuff. So with all of that taken in mind, you're going to see that there's a rise in Sigmund Freud, and then there's a fall, and he's going to die broken alone. So, to understand Freud means you have to understand the background. Now, during this time period, women were not allowed to show their wrists, their ankles. All of that was supposedly too sexually charged. Women were not supposed to have sex with their husbands except to procreate or to make babies. The idea of a woman enjoying sex was completely unheard of. So this is the type of time Freud is coming up in, and we're going to see that's going to play a huge effect, especially when Freud is making such controversial statements as in children are sexually motivated and have psychosexual stages. So we have a lot to talk about, so here we go. Now, the foundation of Freud is the divisions of consciousness. He believes that we have a pre-conscious mind, or a level of the mind in which information is available but not currently conscious. So if I ask you, what did you have for dinner last night? And you say, oh, I had steak and I had asparagus and mashed potatoes. It takes you a second, but you can easily recall. Now, the pre-conscious is just below your conscious. Your conscious mind is aware of the immediate surroundings and perceptions. So what this is what you're listening to my voice. You're hearing what I'm saying. You're processing the information in which I'm telling you. That is your conscious mind. Your pre-conscious is everything. If I ask you, hey, what's your best friend's name? And you think, Jen. Like, you're not expecting that question, so it takes you a second to recall. That is pre-conscious versus conscious. I'm talking to you right now about different types of personality, and you'll be able to answer the questions much more effectively because you're thinking of it. And finally, you have the unconscious mind. Now, the unconscious mind, Freud believed had most of your electrical charges held there. It's a level of the mind in which thoughts, feelings, memories, and other information are kept that are not so easily voluntarily brought into consciousness. So essentially, what is happening in your unconscious mind, you have a large collection of thoughts, ideas, memories, all of these different types of motivations that are not easily obtained. So every once in a while, have you ever noticed you say something that falls out of your mouth and you totally didn't mean it? That's unconscious. That's, Freud would say, is actually, he calls it a Freudian slip, is when your unconscious mind jumps out. And have you ever heard something or randomly thought of something and it's just something you haven't thought of in forever and you can't even remember when? That is part of your unconscious. Now, Freud studies the unconscious by looking at dreams and Freudian slips, or saying whatever comes to your mind. Now, the easiest way to think of consciousness is to think of it as an iceberg. Now, if you look at the very top, you're going to see your conscious is contact with the outside world. This is on the right-hand side, by the way. Your pre-conscious is your material just beneath that of awareness. So what you had for dinner last night, what you had for lunch, and then finally your unconscious, which is very deep below, very hard to retrieve. This is your structure. Now, the next thing to the left, you see the words ego, superego, and id. All of those are the foundations of personality in regards to conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious. So Freud's first theory is conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious, and the layers of our subconscious. Then he turns that into a personality aspect. Now, when we deal with the personality aspect, we have to start with the foundation, and the foundation is your id. Your id is the part of the personality present at birth and completely unconscious. Your id is never fully controlled by your ego. Now, your id is based entirely on your desire for pleasure. You do everything because you want to, and you don't care about anything else. So, one of the things that are under control of your id is your libido, or your instinctual energy that may come into conflict with the demands of society's standards for behavior. What this means is every time you want to have sex, every time you do something instinctively, or anytime you do something because you want to, you just can't help yourself, it's your id is in complete charge, and that's technically your pleasure principle that's in place. So it looks for immediate satisfaction. And an example of this is you can't help, but if you can't eat just a slice of cake, you have to eat the whole cake. Okay? Those would be an example of the pleasure principle. It's based on your animalistic or your devil inside of you. It's not always the right thing, but you do it because you want to. Okay? Now, your next one is ego. Now, ego is part of the personality that develops out of a need to deal with reality, mostly conscious, rational, and logical. Now, your ego is based on society. It's based on what society wants to tell you. It's based on how society works. Now, the principle that controls your ego is your reality principle. Now, the reality principle is a principle in which the ego functions and the satisfactions of demands of the id only when negative consequences result. Everyone does bad things. The ego makes sure you don't do only bad things like your id wants you to, that you kind of balance out. Okay, you break the rules only when you don't think anyone's going to get you in trouble. Those types of things, and that's based on the reality principle. What does society deem okay, and what do I want? How can we make that work? Finally, you have the superego. Now, the superego is the moral center of the brain. Now, the superego is controlled by the ego ideal. Now, part of the superego that contains a standard for moral behavior is your ego ideal. It is your best self. It is your true self. Now, your ego ideal is controlled by your conscience. Now, your conscience is part of the superego that produces pride or guilt. So, if you do something that you feel just awful about, okay, you feel guilty. Like if you stole something and you lied about it, okay, you feel terrible. That is your conscience. Or every time you volunteer and do good work, then you feel better about yourself. That's your conscience telling you what is right and what is wrong. Now, when you think of your id, ego, and superego, and this is so important, it's better to think of the id as the devil, your animalistic side, your spontaneous side, your greedy side, while your superego is the angel on your shoulder. If you've ever seen those really old commercials where you have a devil and an angel trying to persuade you back and forth, okay, that is exactly what's happening here. The id is your devil, your superego is your angel, and your ego is you getting torn back and forth between what's okay and what's not okay. Now, when we talk about personality development, we have to talk about fixation. Now, fixation is a huge part of the psychosexual stages. And what that means is it's a disorder in which the person does not fully resolve the conflict in a particular psychosexual stage, resulting in a personality trait associated with the earlier stage. What that means is if you don't naturally go through your psychosexual stages, you get trapped in this one stage and your personality is going to shape because of it. So, what are the psychosexual stages? Well, there are 5 stages of personality development by Freud that tied sexual development of a child to the shaping of their personality. So, we're going to see that that is going to be an evolution and a huge change. Now, keep in mind, Freud is coming about during the Victorian era. So, the idea of a child having sexual urges and all that stuff is something that's totally unique and very, very controversial at the time. So, you may not agree with everything about the psychosexual stages. However, there is a little bit of truth that we can kind of see. And, it is a theory, it's not a law, but you can see kind of where he's going, even though at times it's a little out there. So, here we go. So the first psychosexual stage is the oral stage. Now, please keep in mind you do need to know the stage name, you do need to know the year range, and you do need to know the conflict and the personality outcome. This is a huge aspect of personality 1, and it comes back in personality 2. So please make sure you're taking the time to really learn this. So the first stage is your oral stage, and it's from birth to age 3. It is the first stage occurring in the first year of life in which the mouth is the erogenous zone. Now, erogenous means deriving sexual pleasure. Essentially what this is saying is that babies, when they're breastfeeding, are deriving sexual pleasure from doing that. Now, when we talk about conflict, the biggest challenge that's being addressed in that stage, and the biggest conflict that babies are facing from 1 to 3 is, of course, weaning or stopping breastfeeding. Now, keep in mind, this is during the Victorian era, and the only way to feed a baby was to breastfeed. Now, today, in 2016, that's not necessarily the case. You can do it in many different ways, including formula and all that other stuff. So when we think about these theories, think back to Freud times, maybe not necessarily perfectly ours. So what it means is that babies derive so much pleasure from putting things in their mouth. Think about it. If you give a baby a toy, what's the first thing they do to it? They put it in their mouth. Now, developmentally, we know that this is the reason why babies do that, developmentally, accordingly, is saying that that's the most sensitive part of their mouth. The sensitive part of their body is their mouth, and that's how they pick up changes and stuff like that, because there's no real feeling in their fingers. However, according to Freud, it's because they're deriving sexual pleasure from it. Now, the second stage is the anal stage. Now, the anal stage is from 1 to 3 years old, and it is in which the anus is the erogenous zone, or they're pooping, they're farting, all of those different types of natural releases from the anus is giving them sexual pleasure. The major conflict, the conflict is toilet training or learning to use the toilet. And another big thing is the ego is starting to develop. Now, previously, little babies focus on what makes them happy and what not. All of a sudden, the ego or reality principle is starting to. Little kids are trying to figure out how much of the world rests on them, how much are they going to do for their parents. When a little kid learns how to use the toilet, they're doing it for their parents, not for themselves. Now, one of the aspects of the anal stage is what happens if a baby does not naturally progress through the oral anal stage. Now, if a child does not toilet train well, you can go anal expulsive or you can go anal retentive. Now, anal expulsive is when they do not deal well with toilet training. Someone did not go through and they become a person who's fixated on the anal stage, who is messy and destructive and hostile. I would say this is my brother. He didn't really progress naturally through, and his house is disgusting and gross, and Freud would say it's because he enjoyed pooping too much that he didn't want to naturally progress, and because of that he's messy and destructive. Now, retentive personalities is a person who is fixated in the anal stage, who is neat, fussy, stingy, and stubborn. Freud would say that's me. Freud would say that because I felt lost in losing the power and the control to poop anytime I want to and have to poop in the toilet, that I've decided I'm going to control as much as my environment as possible. Now, keep in mind, at this stage, we're balancing our ego and our id. So we're trying to figure out what works best for us. Now, your third stage is your phallic stage. Now, your phallic stage is occurring from about 3 to 6 years old, and it's when a child discovers sexual feelings or things that make it feel happy that's tied directly to its genitals. Now, the superego is going to develop. All of a sudden, they are now going to decide what is right or what is wrong based on what their religion tells them, what their parents say, and all of that. Now, during the phallic stage, the conflict is going to be the sexual feelings. They feel sexual excitement when they play with their genitals, male and female. And the conflict is morality. What is right and what is wrong? Should I do it? Should I not? They're really balancing, well, my mom says it's wrong, but my id says it feels good. So they're really dealing with that superego issue. Now, one of the components of the phallic state is the Oedipus complex. Now, the Oedipus complex is the desire of a daughter to have sex with her father or opposite sex parent. So every daughter wants to have sex with her dad, and every son wants to have sex with his mother. And that is part of the Oedipus complex. And Freud believes that every 3 to 6 year old wants to have sex with their opposite sex parent. And they have same-sex jealousy issues with their parents because their parents don't understand and won't allow them to have sex with the opposite sex parent. Now, that's very, very shocking of a statement. And this is one of his most accepted theories. However, we do know that he does push the edge. Now, one of the big components of the phallic stage is the identification or defense mechanisms in which a person tries to become like someone else to deal with anxiety. And what that means is we're going to see a lot of kids try to be better off in order to be like someone else in order to make other people like them more. And that's a huge part of this stage. Your next stage is the latency stage, which is your fourth stage. occurring during during school years, and this is when they have no sexual feelings, where the focus is on creating same-sex relationships and not quite on having sex or anything like that. This is when the child feels the most repressed about their sexual feelings. And this is going to go from age 6 to age 6 all the way to puberty. Now, latency is going to be where the conflict is going to be social, same-sex relationships, all of those things. Now, the 5th stage is going to be the genital stage. Now, your genital stage is when all of a sudden you want to use your genitals with other people. And this is a sexual reawakening for people. This is from puberty on. It's when you've decided you would like to have a sexual relationship with someone, and you go about trying to pursue that. Now, in your textbook, you have a really nice chart. It looks like this. So you have the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. Now, Freud created all of those previous theories, unconscious, conscious, and preconscious, the id, ego, superego, and then, of course, your psychosexual stages. He's also going to lay the foundation for psychoanalysis. Now, psychoanalysis is Freud's term for both the theory of personality and therapy based on it. When we get into therapy, which is our last week together, we will go into it very, very significantly, but keep in mind it does deal with dream interpretation and a lot of other aspects. Now, as we've talked about, and as you've heard through our theories, that some of Freud's theories are very controversial. And these controversial theories are going to cause a lot of problems, and a lot of people are not going to agree. Now, his preconscious, conscious, and unconscious, id, ego, superego, we all understand that's like a good, genuine theory, and that makes a lot of sense. So when Freud starts writing this, a lot of people begin following him. They call themselves Freudians, and they follow psychoanalytic theory very, very hard. Now, as Freud continues to become more and more popular, as he becomes more and more famous, he starts really heading towards the more sexual side of his practice. And we see the psychosexual stages, which are accepted overall as saying, okay, there's some genuine real here. However, after that, his theories get more deranged and a little bit more intense when dealing with people. So what we see is that a lot of his followers are going to leave him, including his daughter, who was, of course, one of the most diehard of the Freudians, and they call themselves Neo-Freudians or New Freudians. Now, these New Freudians are followers of Freud who developed their own competing theories of psychoanalysis. So it is people who were Freudians, however, they have evolved beyond they have cut themselves off after the psychosexual stages. They believe the id, ego, superego, the conscious, preconscious, and subconscious, and psychosexual stages, but all of his later stuff, they separate themselves for and do not agree at all with what Freud wrote. Now, there is some bad blood between our Neo-Freudians and Carl Jung. We're going to see that Carl Jung developed a theory of the collective unconscious. He is a Neo-Freudian, one of Freud's closest friends, and he is going to create the personal unconscious, which is based entirely on Freud's. We're also going to see the collective unconscious, which is what Carl Jung named for the memories shared by all collective members of the human species. Now, this is really what he's known for. He believes everyone shares the same memory, that our ancestors' memories are in our brain, which is why we all have these basic archetypes of what is a good person, what's a bad person, what's a happy person look like, what's a mean person look like in our brain. So when we meet people, we put them in little groups. And he says that that's based on our ancestors' experience that have been passed down from one person to the next. Now, one of the other major Neo-Freudians is Adler. Now, Adler is all about birth order. And he believes are, depending on what order you were born in comparison to your your siblings, dictates how much inferiority you have, which dictates your personality. So the younger you are dictates. So if you're, say, in a family of 3, the youngest one is going to be the most reckless, the most focused on finding who they are as a person. They're going to be a lot more out there and take a lot more risks. While your older person is going to have your most self-confidence, they're going to be the more of a leader because they had their parents' attention completely to themselves, so they have that self-worth. And then your middle child is going to have the most anxiety because they're constantly in competition with one another. And that's Adler's birth order theory. Now, Horney, who is another Neo-Freudian, believes in basic anxiety, that once the situation that you're born into and the tension that you have in your household is going to shape your personality. So if you're born into a very low-key, very calm household, your personality will be very calm and very low-key. If you're born into a very chaotic and hectic environment, you're going to have a neurotic personality. And a neurotic personality is a maladaptive ways of dealing with the relationships or the stress of Horny. Horny is also going to reject Freud's penis envy. And his penis envy is going to be based on Freud. Freud believed that all women were jealous of men's penis, and Horny completely rejected that. Now, your other major Neo-Freudian is Erikson. Erikson believed the theory based on social rather than sexual relationships shape your personality. So depending on your beginning relationships when you're a young child, if you had really successful relationships, your personality would be shaped normally. If you had very negative relationships, both with friends, in the house, outside the house, all those different types of things would affect your personality negatively. And that would cover your whole lifespan. Now, the modern psychoanalytic, we are going to see that Freud was correct about his defense mechanisms. Now, there's a lot of things that I've taught this week that you may not agree with Freud. Defense mechanisms are true. I've seen you use them. I've used them. We've all used them. They're there. They're true. They are effective. The unconscious mind can influence conscious behavior. We've proven over and over again. However, we can't prove others scientifically. For instance, psychosexual stages would be one. Now, when we look at behaviorism, we look at how it affects personality. And one of the behaviors that define personality are habits. Now, in behaviorism, habit is a well-learned response that has become automatic. Like, for instance, some of the things that you do every single day completely out of habit. Like when I come into my house, I walk all the way past my kitchen counter and I walk to my kitchen table and I take off my shoes right at that first corner of the table. I don't know why, but it's a habit and I do it every single time without thinking. So completely automatic. Now, behaviorists believe in the social cognitive learning theory, which is when we emphasize the importance of both the influences of other people's behavior and one person's own experiencing behavior. What that means is that if we receive positive feedback, we do it again. If we receive negative feedback, we don't do it again. And that kind of shapes what our habits are, and those habits eventually form our personality. So if we've had positive reinforcements for certain behaviors, then that eventually will format the base of your personality. Now, when we deal with social cognitive view, we're dealing with a learning theory that includes cognitive processes such as anticipating, judging, memory, and imitation of models. When we deal with social cognitive view, it's when we look at someone's behavior that we think is effective and we mimic that to the best we possibly can. So, one way is when we're a kid and we're struggling in math class and there's a kid next to you who's doing really well, you kind of mimic their behavior. What are they doing? How are they asking questions? What are they doing? And you kind of copy them. And everyone does it. You kind of copy someone's behavior and how they act and what they do, and that eventually will change your own personality over a long enough period of time. Now, one of the biggest aspects of behaviorism is reciprocal determinism. Now, reciprocal determinism is based on Bandura. Bandura is the guy who did Bobo dolls, so he is social cognitive, of course. And it's an explanation of how the factors of environment, personal characteristics, and behavior can determine future behavior. And keep that in mind, that makes a lot of sense. Factors of environment. If those Bobo dolls were not there, would the kids have beaten the crap out of them? No, absolutely not. If the kids didn't have a little bit of rage in them, would they have beat up those Bobo dolls? Absolutely not. And previous behaviors can indicate future behavior. That's reciprocal determinism. If it's not inside of you and you're not in the right environment, it may or may not happen. Now, when we deal with this, we're dealing with self-efficacy. What that means is an individual's perception of how effective behavior will be in a particular circumstance. Okay? Not what that means is how well is it going to endure. When times are tough, people's personalities change. When people are under high stress, people's personalities change. Self-efficacy is when people are under a lot of stress and they keep getting work done, and their behavior is adaptive, not maladaptive. Their behavior is getting things done and not collapsing. That is self-efficacy. Now, when we deal with reciprocal determinism, we're dealing with environment, we're dealing with personal and cognitive factors, and we're dealing with behavior, and all three of these come together. Now, Rotter has a really interesting theory that people are motivated to seek reinforcement and avoid punishment. Now, she believes that our personality is shaped by positive experiences, and she believes everything is based around control. Now, it refers to the locus of control, refers to people's tendency to assume they either do or do not have control over events in their life. Are you one person who believes that, your life is pre-planned and you're just kind of experiencing it? Or do you have the idea that you control your own life and you control your own destiny? Now, internal locus of control is when people assume their actions and decisions affect their experiences. So if I make this decision, I can change everything. So like the butterfly effect. It's kind of an old movie, but it's a great movie for internal locus of control. It means if I make this decision, it then changes the next decision, which then changes my next decision, which can change my whole life. External locus of control is when people assume their lives are controlled by powerful forces, others, luck, or fate. If you believe that God is predestined your life, whatever God you pray to, God has chosen your path and you are living that life, then you are external locus of control. If you truly believe that, God has a plan for me and, I'm living his plan, then you are external locus of control. Now, when we deal with humanistic theories, we're dealing with the humanistic perspective, which is the third force in psychology that focus on aspects that make people uniquely human. Remember, humanistic is very, very positive. It says we are absolutely separate from our animal heritage, and in fact, we are, divinely different. Okay? And this is developed against the negativity of psychoanalysis, saying that we are trapped behind our animal background and our id and how it's corrupting ourselves, and we constantly give into the animalistic side. Now, Rogers is your most popular of your humanistic. Now, Rogers believes in self-actualization tendency, and what that is the striving to fulfill one innate capabilities and capacities that essentially that we want to be the best person we can and we want to achieve our goals. Now, this is all based on our self-concept. Now, our self-concept is an image of oneself that develops from interactions with important, significant people in our life. So, if your parents loved you, took care of you, fostered this great relationship with you, then you have a very positive self-concept. You feel worthy, you feel loved, you feel cared about, and you feel like you matter. If your parents did not foster that, or you didn't have anyone step in and do that for you, and you feel neglected, you feel unloved and unwanted, then you're going to have a poor self-concept, and all that is going to affect your decision making. Now, yourself is an archetype that works with the ego to manage other archetypes and balance the personalities. So depending on your self-concept, it's going to allow you to feel more motivated or less motivated to represent yourself. Now, your real self is one's perception of actual characteristic traits and abilities. Now, your self-concept is essentially your self-esteem of how you feel about your life. Your self is your ego. It's your ideal self. And then your real self is your own accepting of your own flaws and what you truly can do. Like I know from about myself that I work really hard. That is a real self aspect. I work really hard and have a great work ethic. I know I am not a singer. I'm absolutely not a dancer. That is my real self. Now my ideal self is one's perception of whom one is or should be or would like to be. Now, that is what I want to be, my ideal. It's kind of like, I really wish I was like this. I really wish I was a more nurturing person. I truly do. I'm just not a warm and fuzzy person. And the idea of like hugging someone and like saying, oh, there, like it seems so contrived and so fake. I just can't even stomach it. But I'd really like to. I think I would. So when you deal with your ideal self and your real self, so your ideal is your perfection of who you really like to be, and your real self of your flaws, the things, your shortcomings, all that stuff, when they're kind of close in your head, you have harmony and you have peace in your life, and there's less stress, less anxiety. However, when your ideal self is this perfection and your real self is not, you kind of end up with a ton of anxiety and you're kind of like Kanye. You have all different things going on at all different times. He thinks he is this artistic God and he is God's gift to the world because he's so fantastic. But his real self is he is not fantastic and he is not perfect. Now, he definitely has talent, but his real self is nowhere near his ideal self. So that causes him a lot of tension, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, which is why he rages and posts rants everywhere. Now, when we talk about Rogers' theory of personality, you have to there's two different aspects of it. Now, positive regard is warmth, affection, love, and respect that comes from a significant others in one's life. So if you have a positive regard for people, it's because you've been truly loved and you know how to love and you know how to take care of each other. Now, unconditional positive regard is given without conditions or strings attached, and then we have conditional positive regard. It's positive regard when given to only a person is doing what the providers of the positive regard wish. Now, I hope that all of you from your parents have unconditional positive regard, that your parents will love you no matter what. If you decided to declare, whatever, that you love this person, that you want to be this religion, that you want to do this, you want to go here, you want to do this, that your parents would love you no matter what, that is unconditional positive regard. Positive regard is when people care about you, but it hurts them to be around you when you make poor decisions. That's positive regard. And conditional regard is when I only like you when you're doing things I like. We all have friends that we like them when they do things for us and with us, and they serve a purpose for us. We don't like them when they start doing other things and we separate ourselves. Now, when we deal with this, we're also dealing with a fully functioning person, a person who is in touch with and trusting of the deepest, innermost urges and feelings. Now, this is someone who understands who they are as a person. They understand their limitations of care for people. I would say I'm a fully functioning person. I know who I am. I know who I care about. I have a weighting system. There's some people I have positive regard, I genuinely like. There's some people I will absolutely do whatever. It doesn't matter what they do. I will always love them. There's some people that I like and I'll tolerate if I have to, but only until they serve my purpose, and then I'm done. And this is what Rogers would call a fully functioning person. Now, trait personalities are theories, oops, I went back, sorry, are trait theories that endeavor to describe the personality that makes up human personality in an effort to predict future behavior. So when we look at trait theory, we're trying to predict how you'll respond in the future. All the other personality theories are looking backwards. Traits, the only ones trying to predict behavior. Now, a trait is a consistent, enduring way of thinking, feeling, or behaving, something that you're always going to do. Now, Allport is the most famous. He's the first one, and he lays the foundation. He developed a list of about 200 traits and believed that these traits were part of the nervous system, that it was hardwired into us. Now, So Alpert starts, and he literally creates a list of 200 traits. Cattell comes about, and he comes between 16 and 23, and they do factor analysis. Now here is the Cattell. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, are you closer to reserved or outgoing? Are you closer to a concrete thinker or an abstract thinker? And from there, we can take, it's called a self-inventory when you fill out these types of things. We can get a better idea of what your personality is and how it works. Now, when we deal with trait theories, we have surface traits, which are aspects of personality that can be easily seen by other people in outward actions. So I can tell you a little bit about yourself because of your surface traits. Some of you I can get a little bit deeper and go into source traits, but all of you I can do a surface trait. Each of you can do this with everyone you kind of know. Oh, they're kind of a jerk because of this. Oh, they're really nice because of this. Surface traits. Source traits are the most basic traits that underlie the surface traits forming the core of a personality. Like, for instance, I'm an introvert, which means I'd much rather sit at home by myself and sit on my couch with my husband than do anything else. I'm not an extrovert, which means I want to be surrounded by people out dancing and socializing. That's not about me at all. But you wouldn't know that unless you really got to know me, and that's what a source trait's all about. The next big theory is your big five. The five-factor model, it's OCEAN is the best way to think about it. It is the model of personality traits that describe the 5 basic trait dimensions. OCEAN is a nice little acronym. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeable, and neuroticism. So openness is one of the 5. It's your willingness to try new things. Are you open or not? Conscientious, do you care about other people or do you not? Extroversion, do you care about other people? Do you want to be out with other people, or do you want to be an introvert? Agreeableness is the emotional style of a person that may range from easygoing to likable, and neuroticism is degree of emotional instability. You know where I fall on that one. Anyway, guys, it's been a real pleasure. I hope you have a great night and a great week. I hope you enjoyed Freud. Thanks.